People judge what they see, but God judges what they know. When God knows your heart, you can trust him even when nothing makes sense. The weight you are carrying is not invisible. The questions you whisper in the silence, the prayers you cannot even put into words, the tears that fall when no one is watching, none of it is hidden. Before anyone misunderstood you, before anyone judged your intentions, before you even understood yourself, God already knew your heart. And if God knows your heart, then you can trust him with your life, your timing, your future, and even your pain. There are moments when life feels unfair, not because you did something wrong, but because you did everything right and still faced rejection. You loved sincerely, yet were misunderstood. You served faithfully, yet were overlooked. You prayed earnestly, yet answers seemed delayed. In those moments, the enemy tries to convince you that God has forgotten you, that your sincerity does not matter, that your obedience is pointless. But this is where faith must rise higher than feelings. God does not judge by appearances. He does not evaluate you by rumors, opinions, or temporary outcomes. He looks straight into the heart, and what he sees there matters more than what the world ever sees. God sees what people cannot see, and this truth carries a power that can steady your soul when misunderstanding tries to break you. So much of life is lived under the pressure of being seen, approved, and understood by others. From an early age, people learn how to present themselves, how to appear strong, successful, faithful, or confident. But appearances are fragile. They can be manipulated, misread, or completely false. People form opinions based on fragments of information, moments of emotion, or words spoken by someone else. God does not do that. He does not scan the surface of your life. He searches the depths of your heart. There are moments when you will do the right thing with the purest intention and still be questioned. You will love sincerely and still be accused. You will serve faithfully and still be overlooked. This is often where discouragement enters, not because you failed, but because you were misunderstood. When people misjudge you, it creates a deep kind of pain because it attacks not your actions, but your motives. Yet this is where faith must anchor itself in a higher truth. God knows why you did what you did. He understands the intentions behind your obedience, the love behind your sacrifice, and the sincerity behind your prayers. Human judgment is limited by perspective. People only see what you allow them to see or what circumstances reveal in a moment. God sees the full story. He sees the battles you fought before making a decision. He sees the tears you cried before saying yes. He sees the temptation you resisted, the anger you swallowed, and the faith you held on to when quitting would have been easier. When others reduce your life to one mistake or one misunderstood moment, God sees the journey that led you there. This truth becomes especially important when silence follows obedience. Sometimes you do what God asked, but instead of applause, you receive opposition. Instead of affirmation, you face doubt. This can make you question yourself, your calling, and even God. But God's approval is not measured by human reaction. If God knows your heart and it is aligned with him, then no amount of misunderstanding can cancel his purpose for your life. God's ability to see the heart also means he understands your weakness without condemning you. People may see inconsistency and label you unreliable. God sees growth. People may see fear and call you faithless. God sees courage forming slowly. People may see failure and assume disobedience. God sees a lesson unfolding. His judgment is not rushed. His understanding is not shallow. His grace is not based on performance, but on relationship. When you truly grasp that God knows your heart, it frees you from the exhausting need to explain yourself to everyone. Not every misunderstanding requires clarification. Not every accusation needs a response. Some battles are not yours to fight. God does not need your defense to validate your integrity. When you remain quiet and faithful, he speaks through time, fruit, and truth. What people fail to understand today, God will reveal tomorrow in ways you could never control yourself. This truth also humbles the heart. Knowing that God sees everything means you cannot hide behind appearances. You cannot pretend faith while nurturing bitterness. You cannot perform righteousness while ignoring obedience. God's sight is not only comforting, it is refining. He lovingly exposes what needs healing, correction, and growth. And because he sees with love, his correction is never meant to shame you, but to shape you in seasons where you feel unseen. Remember that being unseen by people does not mean you are unseen by God. Some of the most powerful work God does happens in private. When no one applauds your faithfulness, God records it. When no one thanks you for your sacrifice, God honors it. When no one notices your obedience, God prepares a reward that is not dependent on human recognition. God, knowing your heart, also assures you that your prayers are heard, even when words fail you. There are prayers too heavy to speak, too emotional to articulate. God understands them before they reach your lips. He interprets your tears, your silence, and even your confusion. This is why you can trust him fully, because he knows you completely in a world quick to judge and slow to understand. Resting in the truth that God sees your heart brings peace. You no longer live for approval, you live from identity. You no longer fear misunderstanding, you trust God's understanding. And when your heart is aligned with him, that truth becomes enough to keep moving forward, even when the world gets it wrong. Trust begins where understanding ends. And this truth challenges the natural desire to control, explain, and predict every outcome in life. The human mind craves clarity. It wants reasons for pain, logic for delay, and explanations for loss. When life makes sense, trust feels easy. But when circumstances unravel, when prayers seem unanswered, and when the path ahead is unclear, understanding collapses. This is the exact place where real trust is born, not as an emotion, but as a decision. Many people say they trust God, but what they often mean is that they trust him as long as he explains himself. As long as the plan is clear, the timeline is reasonable, and the outcome is comfortable, faith feels strong. But God does not operate within the limits of human logic. His ways are higher, his perspective is eternal, and his purposes often unfold beyond what the mind can immediately grasp. When understanding ends, trust is no longer supported by logic. It is supported by relationship. Trusting God without understanding requires surrender. It means accepting that you do not see the full picture and never will from your current position. You see moments, God sees generations. You see today's pain, God sees tomorrow's purpose. You see loss, God sees redirection. This does not minimize the pain you feel, but it reframes it. Trust says, I don't know why this is happening, but I know who is with me. There are seasons when God will intentionally withhold clarity, not because he is cruel, but because clarity can sometimes become a substitute for faith. If you always understood what God was doing, you would rely on knowledge rather than trust. God is not building your ability to predict outcomes. He is building your ability to rely on him. In the silence, faith matures. In the unknown, dependence deepens. When understanding ends, fear often tries to take control. Fear fills the gaps left by unanswered questions. It whispers worst-case scenarios and magnifies uncertainty. Trust must speak louder than fear. Trust does not deny reality. It declares confidence in God's character despite reality. It says, even if this doesn't turn out how I expect, God remains good, faithful, and present. This kind of trust transforms how you respond to adversity. Instead of panicking when plans fail, you remain grounded. Instead of assuming rejection means abandonment, you consider that God may be redirecting you. Instead of interpreting delay as punishment, you begin to see it as preparation. Trust reshapes perception. It teaches you to wait without bitterness and to hope without demanding control. Trust also requires patience, and patience is formed in discomfort. Waiting exposes what you truly believe about God. Do you believe he is attentive or distant? Do you believe he is intentional or careless? When understanding ends, these beliefs surface. Trust chooses to believe that God is working even when there is no visible evidence. It chooses faith over frustration. Many people walk away from God not because he failed them, but because he did not meet their expectations in the way they imagined. Expectations are often built on limited understanding. Trust releases expectations and embraces surrender. It allows God to be God, not a servant to human plans. This does not mean you stop praying or hoping. It means you stop demanding outcomes on your terms. Trusting God beyond understanding also brings peace. Anxiety thrives on the need to know what will happen next. Trust quiets the heart by anchoring it in God's unchanging nature. Circumstances shift, emotions fluctuate, and plans collapse, but God remains constant. Peace grows not from control, but from confidence in who holds control. When you reach the end of your understanding, you are not at the end of God's work. You are often at the beginning of something deeper. Trust invites you to walk forward without seeing the entire path, believing that each step will be revealed in time. And as you walk, you discover that God's faithfulness does not depend on your understanding, only on your willingness to trust. D. Delay does not mean denial, even though it often feels that way when you are waiting in silence. When prayers go unanswered and time stretches longer than expected, the heart naturally begins to question. The mind searches for reasons, and the enemy whispers that if God truly cared, things would have happened by now. But God's timing operates on wisdom, not urgency, and his silence is never empty. What feels like waiting is often God working in ways you cannot yet see. Human impatience is rooted in limitation. We live in moments and measure progress by visible results. God lives beyond time and works according to purpose. When he delays, it is not because he is unaware, uninterested, or incapable. It is because the outcome requires preparation that goes beyond the surface. Sometimes God delays because you are not ready for what you are asking for. Other times, the situation itself is not ready. Either way, delay is evidence of intention, not neglect. Waiting tests the heart more than it tests faith. In the waiting, motives are purified, desires are refined, expectations are realigned. Immediate answers often satisfy emotions, but delayed answers shape character. God is not just answering a prayer. He is shaping the person who is praying. If the answer came too soon, it might damage you rather than bless you. God sees what the answer would do to you, not just what it would do for you. Delay also protects you from unseen harm. There are paths you want to walk that would have cost you peace, identity, or purpose if entered too early. God in his mercy closes doors until the timing is right. What you interpret as rejection may actually be protection. What feels like loss may be God saving you from a future you were not meant to endure. Delay guards you from consequences you cannot yet foresee. In the waiting, faith is stretched. When results are immediate, trust is shah. But when you wait and still believe, your faith develops depth. Waiting teaches you to rely on God rather than outcomes. It trains you to find peace without answers and strength without certainty. This kind of faith is not easily shaken because it is rooted in relationship, not reward. Delay also reveals what truly rules the heart. When God does not respond on your timeline, do you withdraw or draw closer? Do you grow bitter or become more prayerful? Waiting exposes where trust is anchored. God uses delay to shift your dependence from what you want to who he is. When God becomes your source, the blessing no longer defines you. Many times delay is preparation in disguise. While you are waiting, God is building endurance, wisdom, humility, and discernment. He is aligning circumstances, people, and opportunities in ways you cannot control. The delay is not idle, it is active. Heaven is moving even when earth feels silent. Just because you cannot see progress does not mean progress is not happening. Delay does not cancel promise. If God has spoken something over your life, time cannot erase it. Delay cannot weaken what God has established. His word does not expire. It matures. And when it arrives, it often exceeds what you originally imagined because it comes at the right moment, in the right way, with the right foundation. Waiting is uncomfortable, but it is not wasted. God never wastes seasons. The same God who taught you to trust in the delay will sustain you in the fulfillment. When the answer finally comes, you will see that the wait prepared you to handle it with gratitude, responsibility, and wisdom. So when delay tempts you to give up, remember this: denial closes doors permanently, but delay keeps them intact. God's timing is not punishment, it is purpose. What he has promised will come to pass, not when you are desperate for it, but when you are ready for it. Private faithfulness matters more than public recognition, even though the world constantly trains us to measure value by visibility. Social approval, applause, and acknowledgement have become symbols of success, yet God operates on a different system. He is not impressed by what is seen by many, but moved by what is done sincerely in secret. When no one is watching, when no one is praising, when no one is affirming your efforts, those moments carry deep spiritual weight. There are seasons where obedience feels lonely. You keep showing up, keep praying, keep serving, but there is no applause and no acknowledgement. It is easy to wonder if your faithfulness even matters. This is the testing ground of the heart. Public recognition can motivate behavior, but private faithfulness reveals true devotion. God is less concerned with how loudly your faith is displayed and more concerned with how deeply it is rooted. Faithfulness in private develops integrity. Integrity is who you are when no one is correcting you or complimenting you. It is choosing honesty when dishonesty would be easier. It is choosing obedience when compromise would go unnoticed. These choices may never make headlines, but they shape your character. God values character because it sustains calling. Without private faithfulness, public success becomes fragile. Many people desire influence, but avoid preparation. They want visibility without vulnerability, recognition without refinement. God does not elevate what has not been tested. Before he trusts you with more, he watches how you handle little. The unseen seasons are training grounds, not punishment. What you do faithfully in obscurity prepares you for responsibility in visibility. Private faithfulness also guards the heart from pride. Public recognition can inflate ego and distort purpose if the heart has not been grounded in humility. When you have learned to obey without applause, success does not change your identity. You remain anchored because your worth was never tied to attention. God often hides you before he reveals you so that when recognition comes, it does not define you. It is in private faithfulness that trust with God is built. When you pray without an audience, when you give without acknowledgement, when you remain obedient without reward, you communicate something powerful to God, that you love him for who he is, not for what he gives. This kind of devotion moves heaven. God honors hearts that seek him rather than platforms. Many of the greatest breakthroughs begin in hidden places. The strength you need for public battles is developed in private victories. When temptation is resisted in secret, when faith is practiced quietly, when discipline is maintained without praise, spiritual authority is formed. Public fruit is the result of private roots. Private faithfulness also frees you from comparison. When your focus is on pleasing God rather than impressing people, you stop measuring your journey against others. You understand that everyone has different timelines and different assignments. Faithfulness becomes personal rather than competitive. You are no longer distracted by who is ahead or behind because your focus is on being obedient where you are. God does not forget what is done in secret. He records every unseen sacrifice, every silent prayer, every unnoticed act of obedience. Even when people overlook you, God never does. His rewards are not always immediate, but they are always intentional. What he gives is not temporary applause, but lasting impact. When the time is right, God brings private faithfulness into public fruitfulness. But when he does, it feels natural rather than forced because it flows from years of obedience. There is no need to strive or prove yourself because your foundation is secure. You are not elevated to be seen, but positioned to serve. If you are in a season where no one notices your efforts, do not grow weary. Obscurity is not insignificance. Faithfulness in hidden places is shaping something powerful within you. Trust that God sees, God values, and God rewards what is done in private. Public recognition fades, but faithfulness leaves an eternal mark. Misunderstanding can free you from human approval, even though at first it feels deeply unfair and painful. When people misinterpret your actions, question your motives, or draw conclusions without knowing your heart, the natural response is to defend yourself. You want to explain, clarify, and correct the narrative. But God sometimes allows misunderstanding not to harm you, but to detach you from the addiction to being liked, affirmed, and understood by everyone. Human approval is powerful. It can shape decisions, silence convictions, and influence identity. When approval becomes a priority, obedience becomes conditional. You begin to measure choices by how they will be received rather than whether they are right. God knows this, and in his wisdom, he allows moments where approval is removed so your faith can mature. Misunderstanding exposes whether your obedience is rooted in God's calling or people's applause. When others misunderstand you, it reveals who you are living for. If your peace collapses because someone formed a wrong opinion, it may be because your identity was tied too closely to their acceptance. God uses misunderstanding to realign your heart, teaching you to rest in his affirmation rather than external validation. This process is uncomfortable, but it is freeing. You begin to live with confidence that is not dependent on public opinion. Misunderstanding also teaches restraint. Not every accusation deserves a response. Not every false assumption. Ion requires explanation. Silence in the face of misunderstanding is not weakness. It is wisdom when guided by God. Restraint trains you to trust God as your defender rather than relying on your own words. Over time, truth has a way of revealing itself without force. When you are misunderstood, God often deepens your discernment. You learn to recognize whose voices truly matter. You become selective about who has access to your heart. Not everyone needs to understand you, and not everyone deserves an explanation. God uses misunderstanding to prune unhealthy dependencies on people who cannot carry the weight of your calling. There is also a spiritual protection in being misunderstood. If everyone fully understood you, they might control you, manipulate you, or limit you. God sometimes allows misunderstanding to shield what he is developing in you. Hidden seasons protect emerging purpose. Not every stage of growth is meant to be visible or validated. Misunderstanding refines humility. It removes the illusion that you can control how others perceive you. When you accept this, pride loses its grip. You become more focused on integrity than image. Integrity remains consistent regardless of who is watching, while image shifts to maintain approval. God is far more interested in the former. As you grow through misunderstanding, your faith becomes stronger. You learn to stand firm without applause. You learn to obey without reassurance. You learn to move forward without universal agreement. This builds spiritual resilience. When opposition comes later in greater forms, you are not shaken because you already learned to stand alone with God. Freedom from human approval also brings peace. You stop performing. You stop over-explaining. You stop shrinking yourself to fit expectations. You become secure in who God says you are. This peace is not arrogance. It is confidence rooted in identity. You know that God understands you fully and that knowledge is enough. Misunderstanding does not last forever, but its lessons do. When clarity finally comes, it often comes through fruit rather than explanation. Lives changed, character proven, and consistency displayed speak louder than words. God does not rush this process because it produces depth. If you are currently misunderstood, do not despair. God is using this season to free you. He is breaking the chains of approval so you can walk in obedience without fear. When God becomes your primary validation, misunderstanding loses its power, and you gain the freedom to live fully aligned with his purpose. God fights battles you don't need to fight, even though every instinct within you urges you to defend yourself when you feel attacked, misrepresented, or treated unfairly. When accusations arise or your character is questioned, the natural response is to explain, justify, and prove your innocence. Silence feels risky, and waiting feels dangerous. But there are moments when God asks you to step back, not because the battle is unimportant, but because it is not yours to handle. Self-defense can easily become self-destruction. The more you try to protect your reputation through your own strength, the more emotional energy you lose. Arguments drain peace. Constant explanation exhausts the heart. God never intended for you to carry the burden of defending yourself against every critic. He sees the full truth, and his defense is more powerful than your explanations. When God fights for you, he does it with precision. He does not need noise to reveal truth. He allows time to expose motives, fruit to confirm integrity, and outcomes to speak on your behalf. What you try to fix in a moment, God resolves over time. Trusting him as your defender requires patience, but it also brings rest. There is a EP spiritual lesson in learning when not to speak. Silence under God's instruction is not surrender to injustice. It is surrender to his authority. It is acknowledging that God's justice is higher than human judgment. When you refrain from fighting back, you are not admitting guilt. You are expressing trust. Trust that God knows the truth. Trust that God sees the injustice. Trust that God will act at the right time. God fighting your battles also protects your heart from bitterness. When you take offense into your own hands, resentment grows. Anger begins to shape decisions. and bitterness hardens the spirit. God does not want your heart poisoned by conflicts he can resolve. By stepping back, you preserve your peace and allow God to deal with matters without contaminating your spirit. Some battles are distractions disguised as emergencies. The enemy often provokes reactions to pull you away from your assignment. God knows which battles matter and which ones will drain you without producing fruit. When you let him choose your battles, you conserve strength for what truly matters. Silence becomes strategy, not weakness. Letting God fight for you also builds humility. You accept that you are not the final judge and you do not need to be. God's justice is not rushed, but it is thorough. He exposes truth in ways that cannot be denied. When he defends you, it lasts. When you defend yourself, it often needs repeating. This trust does not mean you avoid responsibility or accountability. If correction is needed, God will guide you to respond with wisdom and humility. But there is a difference between correction and accusation. God corrects to restore. Accusations aim to destroy. Knowing the difference helps you discern when to speak and when to be silent. When you allow God to fight for you, you also grow spiritually stronger. You learn to rely less on control and more on faith. You learn that peace is not found in winning arguments, but in walking in obedience. The outcome of a battle matters less than the condition of your heart when it ends. In time, God's defense becomes evident. Truth surfaces. Integrity is recognized. What was hidden is revealed. And when that moment comes, you realize that trusting God to fight for you was not weakness, it was wisdom. You did not lose anything by stepping back. You gained peace, clarity, and freedom. When you stop fighting battles God never assigned to you, you create space for him to work powerfully on your behalf. And when he does, the victory brings no regret, no bitterness, and no exhaustion. Only the quiet assurance that God is faithful to protect those who trust him. God cares more about your character than your comfort, even though comfort is what the human heart naturally seeks. Comfort feels safe, predictable, and manageable. It shields you from pain and disruption. But character is forged in places comfort can never reach. God's priority is not to make life easy, but to make your life meaningful. He's shaping who you are becoming, not merely smoothing the path you are walking. Comfort often delays growth. When everything is convenient and painless, there is little motivation to change, mature, or deepen faith. God understands this, which is why he allows seasons that stretch you beyond familiarity. Discomfort is not a sign of abandonment. It is often evidence of intentional refinement. God disrupts comfort to develop endurance, humility, patience, and wisdom, qualities that cannot be learned in ease. Character determines how you handle blessing. Without character, success can destroy you. Without humility, influence can corrupt you. Without discipline, freedom can lead to collapse. God sees beyond your current desires and understands what future responsibilities will require. E prepares you in advance by shaping your inner life before expanding your outer life. Comfort focuses on relief. Character focuses on readiness. Many prayers are centered on relief from difficulty rather than growth through difficulty. God listens, but he responds according to purpose. Sometimes he calms the storm. Other times he strengthens you to endure it. In both cases, his goal is not convenience, but transformation. He knows that a comfortable life with a weak character leads to long-term instability. Character is formed through repeated choices in challenging moments. Choosing honesty when lying would be easier. Choosing patience when frustration is justified. Choosing forgiveness when offense feels deserved. These decisions often come at the cost of comfort, but they produce spiritual depth. God values these choices because they reflect trust, obedience, and maturity. Discomfort also exposes what truly resides in the heart. Pressure reveals attitudes, motives, and beliefs that comfort conceals. God allows pressure not to shame you, but to show you what needs healing. When impatience surfaces, he teaches endurance. When fear emerges, he builds courage. When pride is exposed, he nurtures humility. Character grows when truth is confronted honestly. God's focus on character also protects you from shortcuts. Comfort tempts you to choose ease over integrity, speed over wisdom, and appearance over substance. Character anchors you in truth even when shortcuts promise faster results. God would rather delay your progress than allow you to advance without the integrity to sustain it. Many people abandon purpose because the process becomes uncomfortable. They mistake discomfort for disqualification. But God often confirms calling through resistance, not ease. The challenges you face are not obstacles to purpose. They are tools shaping you for it. What feels like STR. Uggle is often preparation. God's commitment to character means he stays with you in discomfort. He does not observe from a distance. He walks with you through refining seasons. His presence is constant even when circumstances are hard. Comfort may come and go, but his faithfulness does not. In time, character produces peace that comfort never could. Comfort fades when circumstances change, but character remains stable. A strong character allows you to face uncertainty with confidence and hardship with grace. It becomes the foundation for lasting joy, deep faith, and meaningful impact. When you understand that God values character over comfort, hardship gains purpose. You stop asking only for relief and start asking for growth. You trust that God is shaping something eternal within you, something far more valuable than temporary ease. Weakness does not disqualify you from God's purpose. In many ways, it is the very place where his power is revealed most clearly. The world equates strength with confidence, control, and visible success, but God operates by a different standard. He is not looking for people who appear flawless. He is looking for hearts that are honest, teachable, and surrendered. What you see as limitation, God often sees as an opening. Human weakness makes space for divine strength. When you rely on your own ability, it is easy to believe that outcomes depend on you. But when you reach the end of yourself, you discover the beginning of God's work. Weakness removes the illusion of self-sufficiency and replaces it with dependence. God does not shame you for needing him. He invites you to rely on him. Many people hide their weakness because they fear judgment or rejection. They believe that struggle disqualifies them, that doubt makes them unworthy, and that failure removes them from purpose. But God sees weakness differently. He sees vulnerability. Why is honesty and dependence is trust? He is drawn to hearts that are open rather than impressive. Weakness also produces humility. When you recognize your limitations, pride loses its grip. You become more aware of grace and more compassionate toward others. God values humility because it keeps you grounded. Pride resists correction, but humility invites growth. Weakness, when surrendered, softens the heart and sharpens discernment. God's power works best where control is released. Weakness forces you to let go of outcomes you cannot manage. It teaches you to pray rather than panic, to trust rather than strive. In these moments, faith deepens because it is no longer supported by confidence in yourself, but by confidence in God. This shift is not comfortable, but it is transformative. Weakness also refines obedience. When you feel strong, obedience can feel optional. When you feel weak, obedience becomes essential. You cling to God's guidance because you know you cannot navigate alone. This produces a closeness that strength rarely creates. Weakness brings you into intimacy with God that success often cannot. God does not wait for you to overcome weakness before he uses you. He works through it. He speaks through hesitant voices, leads through imperfect hands, and moves through fragile hearts. History is filled with people who felt inadequate, yet were powerfully used because they trusted God more than their fears. Weakness also teaches endurance. It trains you to keep going even when progress feels slow. It removes the pressure to perform and replaces it with perseverance. God is less concerned with how strong you appear and more concerned with how faithful you remain. Faithfulness sustained through weakness carries deep spiritual weight. When weakness is acknowledged, grace becomes visible. You begin to see God's provision, strength, and guidance in tangible way. You recognize that every step forward is sustained by him. This creates gratitude rather than pride and worship rather than self-congratulation. In time, weakness becomes a testimony. What once felt like a disqualification becomes evidence of God's faithfulness. You realize that God did not wait for you to be strong. He met you where you were. And in that meeting, purpose was not postponed. It was revealed. Storms reveal the foundation of faith in ways calm seasons never can. When life is steady and predictable, belief often feels effortless. Gratitude flows easily. Prayers feel lighter and trust seems strong. But storms expose what truly holds the heart. They remove the comfort of routine and force faith out of theory and into practice. It is not during ease, but during adversity that the depth of belief becomes visible. A storm disrupts control, Plans collapse, expectations fail, and certainty disappears. In these moments, faith is tested not by what you say you believe, but by what you lean on when stability is gone. If faith is built on circumstances, it will crumble when circumstances change. But if it is built on God's character, it will endure even when answers are absent. Storms have a way of stripping away false security. Things you once relied on, relationships, resources, confidence, routine, may no longer provide stability. God allows this not to leave you empty, but to show you where your true security lies. When everything else shakes, God remains. The storm does not remove him, it reveals him. Fear often intensifies in storms. The unknown feels threatening, and the lack of control feels overwhelming. Faith does not eliminate fear instantly, but it prevents fear from becoming the authority. Faith acknowledges the storm without surrendering to it. It chooses trust over panic and hope over despair. This choice does not always change the storm immediately, but it changes the heart within it. Storms also expose areas where faith is still growing. Doubt surfaces. Questions arise. Frustration increases. This is not failure, it is honesty. God does not reject questions. He uses them to deepen relationship. When faith is challenged, it becomes either abandoned or strengthened. Storms force a decision, either retreat from God or draw closer to him. In the storm, prayer changes. It becomes less polished and more desperate, less formal and more honest. Pride dissolves and dependence grows. This kind of prayer reaches depths that comfort never requires. God meets you in this rawness, not with condemnation, but with presence. Storms also teach obedience without clarity. Often God does not calm the storm immediately. Instead, he asks you to keep walking, keep trusting, and keep believing without visible resolution. This builds a resilient faith, one that is not shaken by delay or silence. Obedience and uncertainty strengthens spiritual roots. When the storm passes, the foundation is revealed. Faith built on God stands firm, while faith built on convenience collapses. The outcome is not just survival, but transformation. You emerge stronger, wiser, and more grounded. What once shook you now strengthens you. Storms do not mean God has failed you. They are not evidence of abandonment or punishment. They are environments where faith matures. God uses storms to deepen trust, refine belief, and anchor hearts in truth. When you understand this, storms lose their power to destroy. They still challenge, but they no longer define. You learn to stand firm, not because the storm is small, but because the foundation is strong. Peace comes from surrender, not control, even though control feels like the safest option when life becomes uncertain. The instinct to manage every outcome, anticipate every problem, and protect against. Every loss is deeply human. Control promises security, but it rarely delivers peace. It tightens the heart, fuels anxiety, and keeps the mind restless. God offers a different way, one that does not depend on certainty, but on trust. Control is often rooted in fear. When you try to manage everything, it is usually because you are afraid of what might happen if you don't. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of disappointment, fear of being hurt again. Control becomes a defense mechanism. But while it may create the illusion of safety, it also creates constant pressure. You are never truly at rest because you are always bracing for what might go wrong. Surrender, on the other hand, feels risky because it requires releasing outcomes you cannot predict. It asks you to place your trust in God rather than your ability to manage situations. This does not mean you stop being responsible or thoughtful. It means you stop believing that everything depends on you. Surrender shifts the weight from your shoulders to God's hands. True peace cannot coexist with control. Control demands constant vigilance. Peace flows from confidence. Confidence that God is present. Confidence that God is good. Confidence that God is capable. When you surrender, you are not giving up. You are giving over. You are choosing trust over tension. Surrender also exposes the limits of human strength. You begin to recognize that no amount of planning can prevent every hardship. No level of effort can guarantee outcomes. This realization is not discouraging, it is freeing. When you accept your limitations, you open yourself to God's strength. Peace grows when you stop fighting realities you cannot change and start trusting the one who can work within them. Many people resist surrender because they fear loss of identity or purpose. They worry that if they let go, they will become passive or directionless. But surrender does not remove purpose, it clarifies it. When you surrender to God, your actions become guided rather than forced. You move with discernment instead of desperation. Surrender also heals the mind. Anxiety thrives on the need to know what happens next. Surrender accepts uncertainty without panic. It allows you to live in the present rather than constantly rehearsing the future. Peace is not found in having all the answers, but in trusting the one who does. As surrender becomes a daily practice, peace becomes more consistent. It is not dependent on circumstances. It remains steady even when plans change. This peace does not deny difficulty. It anchors you through it. You learn to breathe again, to rest again, to trust again. Control isolates you because it convinces you that you must handle everything alone. Surrender reconnects you to God, to faith, and to hope. It reminds you that you are not carrying life by yourself. You are being carried. In the end, surrender is not a moment. It is a posture. It is choosing daily to trust God with what you cannot manage. And in that choice, peace grows, not because life is predictable, but because God is faithful.